Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Bass. I'm the Senior Program Manager of External Engagement and Culturally Powered Communities at the Greater Twin Cities United Way. Thank you for your time and commitment to the community. 2020 has been very challenging for us all. Today, our hope is that we can help play a small role in helping you become a change maker as we move our community forward. But before we get started, I have a few housekeeping details that I need to cover. First, this session will be recorded. Please put yourself on mute and turn your video off. The Community Connection series is designed to inform community stakeholders and community leaders about effective tactics that will allow the community to work effectively together in order to resolve community conflicts, develop initiatives to disrupt systematic inequities, and enhance civic identity development, highlight opportunities, and become more empowered to bring about constructive change in our region. Our objective today is to bring you closer to our work by creating shared deep dive conversations on pressing community issues and the United Way's strategic response. So we want to recognize a unique space where we have convened both our donors and also our community partners. Your presence today is most welcome and appreciative. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the chat function, which Isabella Jong will be monitoring after the panel discussion when space presents itself. I'd like to go over the agenda really quick. So first of all, let me go back. I want to make sure I introduce the speakers. So first, I would like to introduce Adair Mosley, who is the president and CEO of the Pillsbury United Communities. Also, we have Dr. Samina Raja, who is professor of urban and regional planning, the director of food systems planning and healthy communities lab, and the associate dean for research and inclusive excellence at the School of Architecture and Planning for the University of Buffalo. And lastly, we have Alyssa Banks, who is the program officer overseeing Full Lives Initiative at the Greater Twin Cities United Way, and who will be driving today's conversation. Now let's look at the agenda. So first, as you see there, I'm doing the welcome and the overview. Next, I'll transition to Alyssa Banks, who will drive today's discussion, giving context regarding Full Lives. Then it will be time for our speakers to present, where we'll have a quick summary of particular themes and then also a panel discussion. And lastly, we'll have the Q&A, which will be moderated by Isabella Jong. I'll come back at the end, and at the end, then I'll conclude. But first, I want to take the time to acknowledge the land. We would like to take a moment to acknowledge that these are the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of indigenous peoples. We are on the Dakota lands in the Minnesota Makoche, land where water reflects sky or cloudy water. The water, trees, and all living things coming out of the ground carry with them the spirit of the Dakota people, because quite literally this ground is saturated with DNA of the ancestors who lived for millennia here. The land was ceded from the Dakota in the treaties of 1837 and 1851, and we acknowledge the complex and multi-layered history that included violence and trauma. This land continues to hold great historical and spiritual significance and remains sacred for many people. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty, and the Greater Twin Cities United Way is committed to ongoing efforts to recognize, support, and advocate for sovereign tribal nations and indigenous people of the United States and in Minnesota. Thank you. And now, without further ado, I'd like to transition over to Alyssa Banks, who will begin the session.
Thank you, Anthony, for that warm welcome and important land acknowledgement. I too come with humble respects and gratitude and want to extend honor to all of the ancestors and indigenous communities of our region, especially to our food systems leaders and community leaders and organizations that have come before me, those that have and will continue to pave the way to make our community better, more food secure, and full of life. We're here to honor you. And yet today, when we look around the community, we can see there still remains real divisions, disparities and poverty that continue to affect us. Next slide. The COVID-19 pandemic and civil unrest as a result of the murder of George Floyd have forced our community and the world to reckon with long-standing racism and oppression that have continued and continue to perpetuate long-standing disparities and inequality. United Way knows that there are many ways to solve community-wide. Our values of equity, transparency, agility, and collaboration serve as a base for how we work, who we are, and flavor how we show up. And while our community's social problems are complex, we believe that our community will always get better and farther when we work together. That is why we collaborate with our community partners to identify the greatest needs and opportunities. And this is why we work to unite changemakers like all of you on this call today through important community sessions like this that help us to create pathways and dialogue for how we can create a community where everyone can thrive, regardless of income, race, or place. This is our vision, and this is the way that we unite. Next slide, please. We believe that together we thrive, and our theory of philanthropy is such that we believe through focused investments that support best practice programs and service models, efforts that advance advocacy and systems change, and work that strengthens the capacity and connectivity among our community partners and institutions, that together we can and will dismantle inequities in order to foster a better region. We believe in the power of innovation to change mindsets and lives, and in our innovation work of bringing bold ideas and radical creativity and changemakers together, United Way helps to advance better outcomes for our community. We connect strategy to ideas and data. We utilize our compassion with inclusion and weave together multi-layered strategies like our efforts with 211 and nonprofits and government, advocacy, volunteerism, and especially connecting with our community and business partners. Next slide, please. And so when we think about innovation for impact, in recent years, United Way has leaned into its capacity for social innovation. We collaborate and listen with donors to help prototype and scale out innovative and impactful systems level solutions that aim to solve complex community challenges like food security in different ways. And today we're honored to be here to share more about our community food systems work, Full Lives, which takes an innovative approach to strengthening a localized community food ecosystem in order to foster community level food security, equity, and food justice. And when we think about food insecurity, we have to remind ourselves what food means to us in our community to be food secure. For many of us, food is culture, food is family, food is part of how we communicate with one another. It's the way we share our love. It's part of our identity, it's our medicine, it's our power, and it's our wealth. And being able to enjoy and prepare food that nourishes the body, mind, and spirit can help us to keep us healthy and stable and productive members of our community. And yet when we experience food insecurity, it shows up in so many different ways and has profound negative impacts on overall quality of life and a multitude of outcomes for families and communities. Locally, we know that we are experiencing one of the greatest food security challenges in decades. And food systems experts have documented at unprecedented levels deep concerns about how the pandemic is affecting how we grow, produce, distribute, and access food. My dear colleague Sarun Erm and I continue to be in consultation with many of you on the call, with others in philanthropy and community-based agencies, and continue to advocate and leverage important investments that help to provide relief to dozens of nonprofit agencies that are helping thousands of families in our region that are struggling with food insecurity. Within our 2-1 work, since March of this year, we've had over 4,500 calls for food assistance, compared to a little over 3,100 calls during the same time period last year, with an average daily increase of calls of roughly 25 to 30% compared to last year during the same time period. And we know that economic challenges of the pandemic have increased demands and creative shifts for so many of our partners and their service delivery models. As a result of community response efforts to the murder of George Floyd, we have seen historic destruction as well in our community to local assets, food retail, and food businesses that all support the economic stability, vibrancy, and food culture and fabric of our community. The inequality and dynamics of poverty have been heightened further as a result of these crises, and we know that it has forced many of us to think not only about how we address the immediacy of the needs that are happening in our community, but how we can reconstruct more equitable systems that strengthen long-term solutions for all of us.
Better. Mm-hmm.
United Way has played an important role in food security for many, many years. And if we can go to the next slide, please. We know that food insecurity impacts our communities in many different ways, and that a singular solution or program, while important, may at times be limited in its capacity to create long-term systemic change. And this is why United Way supports an array of solutions across a spectrum of food needs and opportunities that impact many diverse low-income communities. Our work centers in emergency food support, coalitions and systems change, advocacy, and community food systems. And today we focus in particularly on that aspect of food security that looks at community food systems and the role that they play. Next slide, please. Our efforts to improve community food security through the development of a model for lives operates under the premise that everyone needs equitable access to affordable, healthy, and nutritious food in order to live a full and productive life, and that a person's race, place, or income should not be a deterrent to access. Why community food security and why local food systems, you might ask yourself? Well, scholar Mark Winnie, one scholar of many that I look up to, writes that community food security is as much of an anti-hunger strategy as it is a community development strategy. It addresses multiple needs and problems within a local food system and is both a goal and a method that embraces the full range of value chain activities, natural resources and agriculture, processing and distribution, nutrition and health, public policy, and promotes a systems approach to food problems. And while the goal of community food security aims to end hunger and food insecurity, unlike emergency food strategies, its method is in fact different. In its fullest expression, community food security draws on a range of community food systems resources and invites the participation of many individuals and sectors. It is the community that is ultimately the unit of analysis and of community impact. And this is why this approach assigns so much importance to the development of community-based resources that improve access to quality, affordable food, particularly in lower income neighborhoods. Next slide, please. And so research has shown that the environment and the zip code you live in can predict life outcomes in many ways, often better than your genetic code. And we know poverty and inequality and the physical lack of healthy, affordable, and culturally relevant food in North Minneapolis has been studied and documented for a long time. And yet the area and neighborhood is as vibrant and diverse as it has ever been. Home to so many important assets and loved by so many people, it's a place that so many of us call home. About 3 years ago, thanks in part to a very generous investment and partnership with the General Mills Foundation, United Way designed and launched Full Lives as a solution to addressing community food level insecurity in North Minneapolis. This approach was deeply informed by community leaders and driven by existing community efforts, and core ingredients of the approach focused on investing in long-term upstream equitable solutions to addressing food insecurity. Solutions that look at how supporting multiple factors within a community food environment can contribute to a more vibrant and food secure ecosystem that supports the diverse needs of its local people. And the grant making framework, as you can see here, looks at opportunities and gaps across these 6 core areas. And you can read more about the approach and the design of the model through a white paper that we wrote in partnership with a wonderful fellow, the Nourishing Communities framework. A total of $1.5 million in community grants was invested in diverse project types and an ecosystem of 11 unique organizations working at different stages of the food value chain, from everything from urban farming and gardening initiatives to farmers and mobile markets, to food entrepreneurship and social enterprise development, to coalition and advocacy work. Projects that complemented each other in many important ways and set their goals and on making the North Minneapolis food system work better for low-income residents of color. Next slide, please. And we have seen so many successes and impacts, and many of our partners are on the call today that can speak to those successes and impacts as well. And what you see before you is not an exhaustive snapshot, but an important one of their collective impact. We've seen many new infrastructure and new businesses developed as a result of the work, policy change and additional funding leveraged by these organizations, deeper partnerships and collaboration, as well as raised visibility for their work, among many other things, in addition to targeting the core outcomes that we sought out to achieve. And the collective impact of these partners is so significant, it underscores that we can go further together. Full Lives in many ways represents a powerful embodiment of an alternative food system vision that perhaps treads outside of dominant paradigms for emergency relief solutions to food insecurity. And is a demonstration, perhaps an example of community groups coming together around shared values and experiences and identities to advance a more equitable narrative of what it means for a community to truly be food secure. And so as we engage in dialogue today with our distinguished speakers, I want to ask us to reflect on what it means to fight hunger and how local food systems can help to strengthen local community food security. How can it help to advance equity and food justice? And I encourage us to honor these Full Lives leaders and honor their commitments to food justice and the communities they represent. And also to reflect on what role does a community's right to self-determination play in advancing solutions to food poverty and equity. I encourage us to reflect on how we can honor and uplift their efforts and respect differences. Differences perhaps in worldview, in our experiences, an understanding of history, an understanding of problems and solutions, and what demonstrates evidence and knowledge and how we advance that towards food systems change. The future and evolution of this work holds so many possibilities and so much potential. And notably, we've had the pleasure and privilege of working with our United Way partners and continuing our deep partnership with the General Mills Foundation to roll up and scale out adaptations of this approach in other communities in Buffalo, New York, and Mississauga, Canada now, that also are challenged with issues of food insecurity. And we know this approach works. We've seen the great success, not only in our neighborhood, and also with our partner communities. We know that progress and resilience also go together, and that our work is not finished. And we've supported the important work of Full Lives grantees, but given the moment that we are in history, we have an opportunity to bolster, in light of crises that we're experiencing, the great work of these organizations. And we are so excited today, and many of you are aware of this through some news that was recently announced, that we are investing a total of $250,000 in new investments between 2020 and 2021 towards supporting and strengthening resilience in the North Minneapolis food system. And we're especially grateful to all of our donors, and especially the Boyd and Estelle family, for their support in this effort. And we remain committed to the future of what community food systems can do to advance food security in our region. And we're excited about the future of this work and its potential for many communities across our region to learn from and to deepen and strengthen their work as well. I'm so grateful to be joined by two very distinguished community and food systems leaders that are part of this conversation today that represent different and unique vantage points, both local, national, and international. And they have also helped to inform and design important community food systems efforts, as well as advance the field of food systems work here, both in North Minneapolis and across the world. And so I'm delighted to turn over the conversation to our lovely panelists. We're here with Mr. Adair Mosley, President and CEO of Pillsbury United Communities, and Ms. Dr. Samina Raja, the Associate Dean for Research and Inclusive Excellence and the Director of Food Systems Planning and Healthy Communities Lab at the University of Buffalo. Dr. Samina Raja, I'd like to turn it over to you now to share some perspectives on food systems and food justice.
Thank you, Alyssa, for your opening comments and for reminding us about the importance of this work. I'm hopeful that you are able to hear me clearly. I want to thank the organizers of this series for drawing attention to such an important conversation within Minneapolis, but I think also setting the stage for a conversation nationally and internationally. In the time that I have, let me see if I can forward the slide. Okay. In the time that I have, I'm going to amplify ideas that you have already heard from Alyssa, specifically drawing our collective attention to how we catalyze food systems change in a way that our attention is on systems rather than only individuals, though both are important. You have heard quite a lot about your presence here and the presence of people who are doing anti-hunger work and supporting reduction of hunger and food insecurity know that we're often concerned about people sitting at a dining table thinking about what food is available to them. Thanks to Alyssa's comments, I think all of us are thinking right now that experience of people in a kitchen or in a dining room is really tied to a much broader system from where food comes from, how it actually travels and gets to people, and then what happens to some of the food-related waste that comes out of people's homes, but also food-related waste comes from every aspect of the food system. So this is not going to be a surprise for most people on this call. But what I would like to draw your attention to is away from the supply chain view of the food system to what I would call the equity view of the food system and draw for you 11 ideas. And an equity perspective of the food system recognizes that a food system is a network, it's a complex system, but the decisions that we make in terms of investments, in terms of policies, in terms of programs, those decisions actually make this supply chain inequitable or equitable. So these 11 ideas for your consideration. And frankly, I think that they are not going to be new, but I hope to emphasize them. The first is that in the United States, there are some larger forces at play that make your work and our collective work perhaps a lot more important and also difficult. So the green bar signals roughly the numbers of farmers and ranchers in the United States. And the blue bar is the processors, manufacturers, and then your service industry. But if you move forward and think about the sales that are accrued from these businesses, the picture changes. In other words, our farmers are not actually receiving the benefits in our food system. It's going somewhere else. And by the way, those benefits are not accruing to people either, which I will talk about. So there's a concentration of power that is inequitable. And there are winners and losers, therefore. And typically those winners and losers are, let's see if my animation works, are determined in a way that, again, the dollar that we spend does not accrue to the farmer. A very small portion of the money that you will spend on food will go to the farmer or to what's called a farm share, about 17, 18 cents, depending on where you buy food and how you spend it. But on the other hand, in the US, we have a lot of messaging. You might call it advertising. I might call it perverse education, that you have nutrition education. There's very little public money devoted to it, but a lot of corporate money on messaging about consumption of, for example, fast food. So consumer messaging dominates. And then we have a system where if you were to buy your calories from carrots versus chocolate chip, which is at the bottom of the slide, you'd be paying 6 times as much for those carrots than for chocolate chip cookies. For somebody who's on limited income, chocolate chip cookies are really a rational decision. My daughter also agrees. So what I will say behind all of those 4 ideas is something that I haven't said thus far. In all of these conditions that don't work for anybody, they especially don't work for our Black and brown communities. And so what we end up today is with a somewhat ahistoric understanding of hunger and food insecurity. So I'm going to present to you a little bit of data. So the ahistoric narrative is we need to teach these people how to eat better. But when in fact, if we pay attention to what has happened to control in the food system, and I present to you one variable on change in farm acre ownership by farmers, black and white, then if we see what happened between 1920 and 2007, you would notice there's actually a little sliver of gain that farmers owned by white farmers gain in acreage, very small sliver. So farming is not good business in the United States, regrettably. But if you put the same lens on what happens to the experiences of farm acres that were owned by Black farmers, the conditions are actually quite dire. On the one hand, we have created a system where we take away ownership over the food system from Black and Brown communities. But on the other hand, we are continually asking people to eat better. If we put those pieces together, that suggests that we have a deeper work ahead of us, more systemic work. The sixth idea is bringing you to my favorite city in the United States. Sorry, Minneapolis. Buffalo is cooler, but Minneapolis, I love you guys too. Is the idea that food apartheid, not food deserts, is our problem. Which means that, yes, we have some neighborhoods where there isn't really prevalence of supermarkets and grocery stores, but this is not due to an accident. This is not, a desert is a natural occurrence. It's not an accident. So the data that you're seeing on the screen is from Buffalo, New York. If you go to predominantly Black neighborhoods, the prevalence of those supermarkets and grocery store drops. What I want to clarify here, the data that you are seeing is controlled for wealth. So we're not talking about poor Black neighborhoods and rich white neighborhoods. We're talking about equal wealth in neighborhoods, and yet you have what many of us would call food apartheid. This opposite happens when you look at convenience stores. You have a lot more convenience stores in predominantly Black neighborhoods and a lot less in predominantly white neighborhoods. And the display illustrates how that change happens. So this happens not because any one of us made a bad decision today, although that may also be the case, but it's really historic, that there are income disparities, there are wealth gaps across cities. So you're seeing a map of the city of neighborhood. On the left side, what you're seeing is concentration of higher income on somewhat north and west side of Buffalo, and you're going to see a concentration of poverty on the east side of Buffalo, on the right side where my cursor is. This disparity is from recent data, but this condition is not recent. It is what we would call systemic, because this is from redlining, and I will show you why that is the case. So on the left side are really maps from urban renewal era. The red blocks that you are seeing in this really old map is the same from this map. This is the same area, and this is the area where banks were not lending money for homeowners to buy homes in predominantly Black neighborhoods. This is also the time when there were covenants on homes that said particular groups of people could not buy homes. That intergenerational disinvestment in this neighborhood plays out today in how food is accessed, is available, and what kinds of businesses open in these neighborhoods. So this is not a new issue. When we fast forward that to today, 2020, this same neighborhood on the east side is also where, regrettably, we are seeing the highest COVID prevalence, and which we know that COVID prevalence and outcomes have a comorbidity with food and diet and chronic disease. So it really puts these neighborhoods at a disadvantage, which doesn't really have to do with necessarily the virus, but what is behind the conditions in the city. A slightly positive remark, which is that all the dots that you are seeing on the map are changes that community leaders are making to change the conditions in the city. And the work was in fact supported and funded by United Way with support from Greater Cities United Way. So shout out to partners in Minneapolis and General Mills Foundation. So these cumulative burdens have a real dire impact on ownership of who owns the food system in Buffalo. We have 15,000 vacant lots in the city, but we have one Black owned and operated commercial farm. I'm going to stop for a second. 15,000 vacant lots in the city, one Black owned operated commercial urban farm. That is, again, not necessarily an accident or a naturally occurring event. There are policies that could be utilized and put in place, which I'm happy to discuss in the Q&A. The 10th point is no surprise to you, because those complex underlying conditions are rarely discussed in public conversation, this conversation being an exception. Most Americans' understanding is of abundance in the marketplace. And therefore, personal choice and failings of those people are emphasized, this particular sliver, while graying out what our mind sometimes refuses to process. So the last slide, I was trying to go fast here, is I'm going to go back to a story that many of us have heard, which is let's give fish to people, to hungry people, or teach them how to fish. And I think that the shift from giving people fish to teaching them how to fish is a really worthwhile one. However, in 2020, I would invite you to consider, what about the waterfront to the river that is blocked from people of color? What about the fact that if they actually ate that fish, that they would be at the risk? The river is polluted from effluent of industries that were allowed to be on the banks of those rivers. In other words, that even if you were to build the capacity of people and teach them how to fish, we should not stop there. We should really be asking ourselves, what are all the ways, comprehensive ways, to make a food system equitable? Let's figure out all of that and do that together. Make the food system equitable. Happy to talk more. Here's my contact information. Thank you for listening. And I am going to give this magical control back to my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Raja, for that very, very rich and in-depth presentation and perspective. I know it's probably left many of us with deep reflections and more questions that hopefully will come out in the chat later in this conversation. I'd now love to turn it over to one of our close community partners, Mr. Adair Mosley, President and CEO of Pillsbury United Communities, to share his perspectives and leadership on systems work, both in North Minneapolis but across our region. Adair?
I may still be on the slides here.
Sorry, those are my slides.
No worries, and things are going off that shouldn't be. Let me fast forward, but good afternoon, everyone. I'm Adair Mosley, and I have the privilege and honor of serving as the president and CEO of Pillsbury United Communities, a 140-year-old community impact organization anchoring its work in humility and co-creating solutions with community. And ultimately, this is where we believe justice lives. And the work that we are doing every day is in pursuit of a more just and equitable society. I probably can echo a lot of people on this phone as you were sharing the data, Dr. Raja, that it was like, it felt like church because it was amen, right? That truly what we are experiencing here is categorical and systemic racism. It's systems of white supremacy, it's categorical disinvestment in Black and brown communities. And how we've arrived here today, I've been saying it is food apartheid, it is intentional, why we don't have the investments in community. And this is not only affects our food systems, but it's the quality of education that Black and brown children receive, it's economic development, it's home ownership, it is an entire ecosystem that's interconnected simply because of looking at the systemic racism that continues to and is pervasive throughout of our society. So I'm so thrilled that that was a wonderful setup to this presentation. A little bit about Pillsbury. Again, we are community builders, co-creators change toward a just society, and it's undergirded by a vision that every person has personal, social, and economic power. And all the work that we are doing in this organization is really laboring to ensure that everyone walks away with that power, that individuals and community have the personal, social, and economic power, and that it's a self-actualized and self-determined vision for themselves and their families. I think I'm going the wrong way. There we go. It's hard to see these little dots here on the screen. Okay, so to explain a little bit about the system here, sorry, I'm getting all over the place here, but we are, just to give you a little broader context around the ecosystem that we have at Pillsbury United Communities. And I must say, while I'm speaking about the work of Pillsbury United Communities, there are many wonderful, as Alyssa mentioned, the 11 organizations that were part of the Full Lives Grant process and coalition, West Broadway Farmers Market, Appetite for Change, Northside Economic Opportunity Network, North Minneapolis Growers, just a really robust ecosystem of what I categorize as food justice kind of activists who are every day trying to disrupt the exact system that Dr. Raja explained. And I couldn't be prouder to walk alongside this journey in ensuring that our families have equitable access to healthy food in our communities than with the individuals that I've named, plus others. But Pillsbury United Communities, we're doing, as part of our ecosystem internally, we're meeting the emergency and basic needs of community through food shelves and community cafes. And just to give you a little bit of context of what we've been experiencing during this moment of COVID, from March to September, we've served over 500,000 pounds of food to communities. And 12,000 unique individuals have been dependent upon an emergency food shelf kind of system. We've also served 22,000 free meals during this moment. And this is the narrative across our region of both emergency food solutions, where we've seen an increase in consumption of and utilization of our food shelves. So that's one part of our ecosystem. The other thing that we're doing as an organization is we have 5 urban farms throughout the city. And these urban farms are sourcing back into our food shelves, so that way we can really have a hyper-local strategy to getting healthy food consumption into the households of Black and Brown, particularly Black and Brown families. But they're also working alongside many urban ag interns and youth. For example, this summer we had over 25 youth that were interns in our urban farms. And this is ultimately a part of that ecosystem. And as Dr. Raja mentioned, the more we can lift up policies that look at land use, particularly public spaces that can start to have families grow more of their own, is a good thing in increasing healthy food consumption. But part of our innovation is we don't stop there. We also have this wonderful freight farm, which is equivalent to about a little over an acre of growing space. And it's a hydroponic farm. It uses about 10 gallons of water a week. And it's growing greens and herbs. This too will also have urban youth farmers as part of its model and strategy, both teaching STEM education, also hyper-localizing the consumption of healthy herbs and greens into community. We've had a few wonderful harvests so far that have been sourced at some restaurants and then also at grocery stores. And so just another source of innovation that we're continuing to bring to the ecosystem, particularly in North Minneapolis. And then finally, as part of this entire ecosystem, many of you know 3 years ago, we went on a journey of opening a grocery store. And today that grocery store sits in North Minneapolis at 44th Avenue in Humboldt. And it is a source of pride, and it has restored dignity for a community. And it answers a lot of the questions that Dr. Raja mentioned very early on. that if we're really centering communities' voice and their aspirations, oftentimes we won't stand up charity. We'll stand up new innovations like this that truly puts access and opportunity. And we know that enterprise developments like grocery stores not only increase, it demystifies that the definition around food desert, if you will, but it also is an economic development driver. It's a workforce development strategy. And so the more we can bring these types of enterprises and innovation to our communities. As part of this model, it also intersects health because we know that even though there's a lot of corruption and it's an inequitable system in terms of our food systems, we do know that we're working alongside of our community as they have had alarming disparities as it relates to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity. And so how do we intersect both health and hunger as part of the model? Some ways that this ecosystem has come together, and this is a representation of the entire Full Lives kind of interdependency, is that North Market, so other funders, other grantees, that were part of the Full Lives cohort have all figured out a way how to intersect strategies and to strengthen the overall ecosystem in North Minneapolis. So here's two great examples of that. Minibun, which is small business entrepreneurs, and they've been working with the Northside Economic Opportunity Network, and which really teaches the business skills, business model, pro forma, really strengthening the business side. We've been partnering with them to allow those entrepreneurs to come into our grocery store and do pop-ups. And so we've given our deli space to these entrepreneurs and to be able to grow and sustain their business models. At the same time, we've been supporting small growers like Miss Candace, who have a plot of land, who's growing vegetables and produce for our community, and we're sourcing that back through the grocery store. And we're paying her the same price we would pay a wholesaler. So that way we can make sure that as this being this economic driver in North Minneapolis. Another great example is Appetite for Change. They were the launch of a 50% produce program. And we were able to intersect that program market where we started to offer our residents 50% off produce, because as was illustrated before, in order for a family to eat healthy, the cost versus buying highly processed food that we know are causing these downstream disparities. And so this is a small example of how the entire ecosystem is supporting itself. I'll leave you here with, as we talk about this work, that one of the things that we hold true to this is the community is the greatest source of innovation, and be able to center their voice and center their aspirations and dreams for a community. And we do that particularly by using a community-centered design process, design thinking, human-centered design, where we put community at the center of the problem-solving question. And because of that, we get innovation like North Market. And we use this exact approach in order to be able to emerge that solution in community. And with that, I leave you with a little bit of hope and inspiration, because I truly believe all of us are all we need as we think about how to move this work forward, as we think about how to give more investments to ecosystems like what we've been able to demonstrate in Full Lives in North Minneapolis. It will be a collective endeavor. Thank you for listening today.
Adair, Mosley, thank you so much for your leadership and your incredible work with so many important organizations and visionaries that are really advancing just a wonderful change in North Minneapolis as it relates to the local food system and food security. We have about 15 minutes remaining for our time today, and I would love to open up our conversation for some dialogue with both you, Adair, and with you, Dr. Raja. And so I would encourage our wonderful guests that are coming from many different sectors and fields to please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. I'll try to weave them into the conversation here. I know many of you have been chatting, answering questions as we've gone through this dialogue, but when we think about the context that we're in right now, Adair and Samina, especially with COVID-19 and community unrest, and the challenges that are pressing on our community food system, one of the things that continues to emerge is the importance of resilience and strength, and how do you sort of bounce back in the midst of what seems like sometimes very challenging work. And I wonder what your perspectives are on this notion of resilience as it relates to addressing community food security. How can we be supporting and fostering community food systems resilience?
Well, one of the things that I've been saying, and I think it's something we've adopted as an agency, a fundamental belief that in order to foster a resilience in community, we have to be thinking about the systems, infrastructure, and policies and strengthening those things. And that allows for a community to weather adversity, weather something like COVID when we're strategically making the investments. And so we cannot, I think, center resilience on the individual. While I think that that's important, but really what builds the resiliency of individuals and community is when we think about the systems and the policies that help barricade or the adversity. And oftentimes Black and Brown communities are categorically disenfranchised in that area. We strategically don't make the investments that allow for them to be able to come back. Mm-hmm. at a pace equal to their counterparts.
Thank you for that reflection. Dr. Raja, would you have anything to add to that?
I agree 100% with what Adair just shared. That was incredible. I'm reflecting on the conditions in Buffalo specifically and how people responded to COVID, and I'm sure the same must have happened in Minneapolis too. When we talk about resilience, I have mixed feelings about resilience, to be clear. I think sometimes resilience is code word for people having to withstand difficulty, as opposed to let's create conditions that would allow them to come back to wherever they were. But resilience is about delta, right? Here you are. Now, when something bad happens, come back here. But what if this is already bad? And people have been resilient for 400 years. So I just want to say that about resilience. So I appreciate the term community resilience that Adair used as opposed to individual resilience. For that, I would say in the COVID response world, communities have really good insight on resilience. In Buffalo, one of our Black leaders, Miss Gail, responded rapidly and set up 50 front yard, backyard gardens within 1 month. So yes, we needed the money, but we needed her insight and leadership to make it happen. She had built the relationship. She was from the community. And so I think for any investment or effort on community resilience, we have to build on what is already resilient in Black and Brown communities, which are relationships. That's what they've got. And so any effort that we build, investment, new programs, they have to build on those relationships and lift everybody up together. That's all I would say about that.
Thank you for that clarification and also those reflections. One of the things I think that is coming up in some of the chats is just, the notion of, the complexity and perhaps the many different ways in which you can tackle the issue of food insecurity. And so, is there a sort of recommendation, if you will, of how to best go about addressing it? Do we have, we've done full lives and, as you can see, United Way approaches it from many different sectors, but, is there a area that allows us to have the greatest tipping point if we're going to invest in food security issues. Perspectives on this?
I'll let Adair go first.
I was hoping you were gonna go first. I think what's been the theme of this entire conversation is that the innovation and solutions rest in community, and I think that that's what Full Lives Unearthed is, that there are already partners and individuals that were doing the work, but need a level of catalytic investment. I think what United Way has done here is strategically intersect and bring in a collaborative approach, bring those partners together where we once perhaps weren't as working together in somewhat of a siloed approach. And while we continue to advance our individual missions as organizations and institutions, we do find this point of intersection. And so I think that tipping point continues to rest in community that will need the level of investment. And the investments have to be as big as the problem, right? When we're talking about undoing centuries of injustices, then we really have to be putting the level of investments that's demonstrated by a company like General Mills back into community that helps strengthen that ecosystem over time.
Thank you for that reflection. Raja?
I would agree. We didn't plan to just say we agree on everything. I promise to the guests, but in the food system context, I think it's important to recognize that yes, food is important. We all need it, but we also need other things in people's lives that impact food. Yeah. So livelihood. So any strategies that are happening in partnership with communities, community residents will tell you that we also need jobs. We need living wages. We need good quality healthcare. People don't really necessarily lead their lives in silos. So just like the food system is a system, and I appreciate the full lives concept, I think attending to that idea and investing food dollars or programming where not only is food insecurity lowered, but there are greater chances of wealth generation, savings, workforce development, upward mobility for people, and done in such a way that we are taking leadership from residents. I think that's a greater recipe for resilience. Community resilience, not individual resilience.
Alyssa, I couldn't agree more with the point of the systems thinking and approach as we move this work forward, that as Dr. Rogers mentioned, right, siloing one part of the ecosystem out, we just know that there's so much interconnectedness. We need the public health strategy and approach. And as we think about social determinants of health, right, it is the intersection of transportation and housing and employment, and all of those things are codependent, and we have to be addressing the entire ecosystem if we are to move people to a more equitable and just place. So I think that that's going to be a huge part of the evolution of this work where we need to go.
That's a really good segue to sort of my question, and perhaps I know we're getting close to time here, and there's so many just awesome reflections and comments that are happening in the chat, and I just want to acknowledge, I see you, and we'll try our best to reflect and follow up with you for those of you that had specific questions about some of the specific aspects of programming and terminology. But thinking about the future and the evolution of this work, so much of food systems development, right, is about planning and thinking about the future and what is to come and beyond. And so I guess I'm wondering, from your perspectives, what are your hopes and aspirations and dreams for the future, for the food system's future, for our local communities and for our broader regions? What would you hope to see happen and change?
I'm happy to go first on this one, Adair. That's okay?
Yeah.
We are modeling how to have a conversation for the country here. I would say, for me as an urban planner, I think about all the ways in which city governments choose to invest their money in public works, in police, in infrastructure, in housing, economic development, you name it. Your local government budgets, they are what they are. Same with state governments, same with federal. I think from my point of view, I'd like to see US local governments view food and food justice as a public policy responsibility. Mm-hmm. So there are, as some of you have heard me say in other contexts, that about 1% of local governments, 1%, not 20, not about 1%, responding to a national survey that my team conducted, they responded and said that food was a priority for them. And this was just a few years ago. This was in 2014. So that's sobering. So we think that we need roads, we think we need economic development, we think we need all these things, but we've never met anybody who doesn't eat. So for me, a vision going forward would be for local governments to alter the proportion of their budgets, take it away from whatever they spend it on, whether it's police, whether it's economic development, focus it on making food justice a central agenda. It can be done. That would be my aspiration.
Thank you, Dr. Raja. Adair, how about for you? How about for
Dr. Raja? I get to do that now. So it's just wonderful comments. But I believe as we think about the renewal, building our communities back better, if you will, that the food systems can be such an economic driver. And I think to Dr. Raja's point, it's going to take some public policy. It's going to take really catalytic investments, but can be economic anchors where we're supporting micro entrepreneurs and where we're supporting small business development. And then other things around that will come in as part of that. And so I believe our hope, if we center, as we think about what's the economic revitalization for communities, that food and the food systems work can drive truly more equitable economic development opportunities for our communities and wealth creation. That it can, if there's a reallocation of the resources that's focused on equity, that we can think about the food systems work creating wealth and building wealth in Black and Brown communities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adair, for that reflection. And I would just echo all of the amazing sentiments and reflections that you all shared. I think we're so it's so wonderful to have both of your leadership and expertise in our communities and in your respective areas of work. I know that there's so much rich information and perspectives here to unpack, and this is only the beginning of much more work to come. We look forward to continuing to stay in partnership and in deep collaboration with you as partners in this work. And so I just want to, again, thank you with a deep gratitude for your work and for joining us on the call. And I also want to just offer up a final reflection before I turn it back over to my dear colleague, Anthony Bass, that, it's so important for us to continue this work of equity and justice, to not just have good intentions, but be intentional in how we work, how we show up in our beliefs and our understanding and what we say and what we do. And I encourage us all to continue to engage in courageous conversations, take courageous actions as it relates to this work. And having these conversations like this is the start of many more opportunities to come. So thank you again, everyone, for your time. And thank you for the opportunity to share the important work of Full Lives and the importance of community food systems in addressing food security. I'll turn it over to Anthony to close us out.
So thank you, panelists, staff, donors, community leaders. A video link of today's session will be included in a newsletter that is sent out monthly. Our next CCS event will be Career Academies, and that will take place November 18th at 1 o'clock. And I'd like to end with a commitment to live inclusively. So I commit to be intentional in living inclusively. I commit to spending more time getting to know myself and understanding my culture. It is in understanding myself that I am better positioned to understand others. I will acknowledge that I don't know what I don't know, but I will not use what is unconscious as an excuse. I will be intentional in exposing myself to difference. If I don't know, I'll ask. If I'm asked, I will assume positive intent. More importantly, I will accept my responsibility, increasing my own knowledge and understanding. I commit to speaking up and speaking out even when I'm not directly impacted, for there is no such thing as neutrality in the quest for equity, justice, and inclusion. I will strive to accept and not just tolerate, respect even if I don't agree, and be curious, not judgmental. I'll commit to pausing and listening. I will be empathetic to the experiences and perspectives of my others. I will use my privilege positively and get comfortable with my own discomfort. I'll commit to knowing, getting, and doing better than I did yesterday. Keeping in mind my commitment to live inclusively is a journey and not a destination. Thank you all for attending and have a great day.
Thank you.